And before we get into the message real quick, I want to let you guys know that we've created about a 12-week reading plan that is going to go along with our series through Exodus. And we've created them in a little bookmark form. And so we have some in the lobby. If you're interested in following along, I'd really invite you to read along through the book of Exodus as we go through it, to kind of meditate on it, take your time to journal through it. And so we'll be reflecting back to this. And so for the next few weeks in our teaching series, we're going to be here in chapter 2 and 3, and that is covered here in week 1. And so you could even take your time, make this your own. I will warn you, it gets bogged down when Moses is when the author is giving us these detailed stories or detailed directions of how to build, and it is laborious reading. So when you get there, there is a greater point, but I would encourage you to take one of these and invite you into that as we go through this over the next few months. So, anybody ever heard the name, composer extraordinaire John Williams? Anybody know who John Williams is? Yes, music folks in the house. He's an American conductor who's written some of the most recognizable music behind many of the movies that are familiar to us. And his compositions provide the melodic background behind some of the most inspirational, some of the most dramatic, some of the most cinematic moments in movie history. And with sometimes in as little as 3 notes, his melodies become instantly recognizable. For example, and I want to have a little fun with this. I'm going to invite you into being like a group choir for a moment. You ready? I'm going to give you a movie, a little bit more of a detail on a starting note, and then I'm going to invite you to sing what melody has become iconic in that moment. You ready? Here's the movie, Star Wars. Here's the character, the theme, Darth Vader's march. And here's your starting point. Now, you know sometimes how I break in song? Now that it's planned, it's like, this is really embarrassing for me. Da, you ready? Da, everybody sing that back. Da, beautiful. All right, so movie, theme, there's only 3 total notes. You ready? Ready, set. Da. Look at that. We just Jacob Colliered up in here on church, for anybody that knows. Let's do another one. In as little as 2 notes, John Williams created one of the most infamous doom and gloom sounds in his movie, Jaws. Same note, da. Ready? 1, 2. Oh, this is powerful. Who's going to do the other part? Okay, so in as little as 2 and 3 notes, John Williams writes these melodies that become instantly recognizable. When we sing those songs, you can be transported to the scene, to the emotion, to the visualization of what is carried underneath those cinematic masterpieces. And in so many ways, just like John Williams does, 2 notes, 3 notes creates a motif that becomes a broader theme with thousands of expressions in cinematic form. Exodus is that to the story of Scripture. Exodus is that to Jesus' story, and Exodus is that really to your story. And what that means, as I said last week as we kicked this off, is that if you and I are going to understand Jesus, you've got to understand Exodus. But furthermore, we can't understand ourselves and who we are as a collective community together without understanding Jesus. So if you want to understand yourself, you've got to understand Jesus. If you want to know yourself, you have to know Jesus. And in that journey, Exodus shows us that it is not ultimately our action or our story of escape, but it is God's action and his rescue plan that makes all that possible. Said a different way, Exodus is not a story of a people who escape. It's a story of a God who rescues, which begs a singular question today that I believe is answered in this scene from Scripture that we just read. And this is the question: how does God rescue? How does God rescue? Everybody say, how. That's not the question we usually lead with. we usually lead with, when will God rescue? Pretend right now that you are taking the risk of timing your Grubhub lunch order to the exact moment that you think we're going to be out of here and you can get the kids or you can wrap up conversations and get home and everything goes on time. Anybody ever place a Grubhub order? Yeah? How many of you have ever placed a Grubhub order blind from a restaurant you've never been to in person? Especially if you've traveled a bit? Yeah, it happens. Now, it's interesting to me in that dynamic, usually all we're thinking about is I'm hungry and I want to eat. We're not asking questions like, I've never seen their kitchen practices. I don't know that this isn't in some, mammal's basement and somehow conned their way into Grubhub, which does happen. I don't know if they've passed health department inspections. I don't know if they have a 3-bowl sink and they're taking the proper protocol. I don't know if they're getting chicken to the right. These are all my questions. And so, we just blindly feel hungry. We don't want to cook. We don't even want to leave the house anymore, or we want to time the perfect timing and God's sovereign plan between the end of this service and our hungry bellies when that bag of food may be piping hot, sitting, waiting on you at the front door. The question we're asking is not, how is this prepared? It's, when will it get there? You and I don't often ask the question of how. We ask, when? Think about the situation you're facing right now. Think about what's causing you to cry out to God or to vent to a friend. It might be some marital problem. It might be a disruptive baby of your own. It might be a family issue. Someone in your family is sick, and maybe you've been praying for weeks, for months, for years. You've been longing for healing. Maybe you're trying to start a family, or it might be a societal problem that you see every day, and you're wondering, does anyone else care? What is it in your life right now that you're saying, how long, God? When will you rescue me from this? You see, when we face tough things in our lives, we are usually focused on how long they will last. When will you fix this? When can I be removed from this? When will it be over? But here, the Exodus narrative is not focused on when will God rescue. Through painstaking detail, the author is concerned with how God rescues. And if you want to know the answer to the when question for Moses' story, by the way, it's 80 years. From this moment to the ultimate exodus of Moses and the Israelite people, it is 80 years. So that's my new answer when we have pastoral counseling sessions. Man, I got some things going on. 80 years. That's all I got for you. 80 years. When? I don't know. 80 years for Moses. How? What's happening in me? What's happening through me? What's happening in Moses? A guy that led the Israelite people to the ultimate exodus, serving as an archetype of the narrative and the story of Jesus. Moses goes through 2 personal exoduses before he leads the people to their own. It's not when will God rescue, it's how does God rescue. And I think there's something in this text for us. And here's what we're going to see in this narrative, that God rescues 3 ways. He rescues unexpectedly, he rescues subversively, and he rescues thoroughly. Unexpectedly, subversively, and thoroughly. Now, let's set the context a little bit, because this is that romantic story about a baby who's thrown in a basket on top of a river and gets rescued. We know the end of the story, so that doesn't sound scary to us. The reality is, a mom put their baby on a river and hoped for the best. The river that Pharaoh was using to kill babies. My brother Brian, who so ironically is now a firefighter and sees things, responding to things. There was a scene about 10 years ago. We used to have a campground on the Ohio River, and someone tragically lost their life in a boating accident. They hadn't recovered the body yet, and because we're terrible people, we joked with him, Brian, really sorry, but the body washed up on the deck, our dock. You just don't need to go down there. And we were just messing with him and messing with him and messing with him. It turned out not to be real, and that's really a morbid thing to joke about today, so I apologize. But we messed with him about that, and I want you to think, hold on a second, like the Nile River is not like this stream behind our house, calm and collected. It was like the death river. I imagine at times there were floating babies going down it. Mom sticks her baby in that same river. Unexpected, subversive, thorough. This is not a happy time. Pharaoh is a bad dude with a lot of power doing horrible things. He's insecure, and he's threatened by God's people. And in response, he employed a self-defeating public policy about, I am building a massive nation for myself on the backs of Hebrew men and women, but I'm also going to kill those same little boys that could no longer become used in my empire building. He was so messed up that he was actually self-sabotaging his own plan. So Pharaoh's not a good dude. And the Israelites are a complicated group of people, but they're God's chosen family. It's the people that God has chosen to show them what he is like and to whom he has chosen to work through to save and bless the rest of the world. And into that world comes to us a baby known as Moses. And I'm going to challenge you not to think about what you know or of the rest of the story. Here comes an innocent child into that world. And Israel needs free, and Pharaoh needs gone or out of power. And there's a lot of ways that God could do that. I can think of some ways. I can think of some ways to be quick and simple, maybe violent, but they could be over fast, right? I can think of some pretty efficient ways to do it. You and I, when you're facing the problems you're facing right now, you could think of some easy ways to get out of it. You could hit that Staples easy button. You got a lot of scenarios like if it could just go like this, God, and this timing, if I'm thinking about, you can think of it that way. And the question is, how does God rescue? Not in a very obvious way in this case. And before you think about, well, God rescues through Moses, before Moses could rescue a people group, Moses himself had to be rescued. And the answer to that first question in the earliest part of the scene that we're brought into is, how does God deliver Israel from the tyrannical Pharaoh? Not Moses, but 2 midwives, 2 women, in a patriarchal way, in a patriarchal society where women are viewed as less than. God uses 2 women to save Moses. In fact, he uses 6 women. He uses women who have been in a political people group conflict. He uses Pharaoh's own daughter, Pharaoh's sister. He uses Hebrew women. He uses Hebrew midwives. He pits 2 people groups who seem to be enemies that they're supposed to be and uses them unexpectedly and subversively, but thoroughly to help bring about rescue. Moses is a man who will lead the people out, but who rescues Moses first? 2 women. Now, there's something even more amazing in this section. And it is a bit academic and technical, but it will turn this story from black and white to full color. And I want to give my best attempt at it because I don't want you to miss it. There's something subversive in the storytelling itself that the author of Exodus has gone to great lengths to bring to us. In chapter 2, verse 2 that Brandon read earlier, it says that Moses' mom gives birth and lays eyes on him, and she says that he was a good child. In our translation today, I think it said he was a fine child. Anybody just looked at your kid, like, you're fine. It was more than that. Like, you are good. You're the seed of everything good and holy. You're part of a bigger story. Like, is good. New creation being looked upon as good. Does that sound familiar? That is a direct callback to the language of Genesis. And that's a callback even more specific to the garden. Same word of good, similar literary structure, and it's a callback to this moment. Think about this moment in Genesis 3 when it says, quote, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, same word good, for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. And then what happened? Everything unraveled, right? Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked, so shame came into the mix. And so they sewed themselves leaves together and made cups, so they hid. So like sin has entered the world. Woman sees a corrupted fruit that will further corrupt her. She says it is good. And then Moses' mom looks at him, says, he is good. The tree that cursed humanity is seen as good by one woman. And then the baby that will be used to rescue humanity by rescuing Moses, by rescuing the nation of Israel, is seen as good. There's a John Williams thing going on right here. There's like a variation on a theme, because the Exodus story reads, and the author has gone to great lengths to connect this moment back to Genesis, and in this case, catch this, and let this not just be a cool academic thought, but man, is it powerful. This moment can read to us, I think the invitation is to see Moses' mom as Eve's redemption story. It's so unexpected, so subversive, so powerful and thorough. The moment is not just about the rescue of Moses, it's about the redemption of women. Moses' mom looked back at her baby and saw a rescuer, a deliverer, and in faith, she acted to partner with God in rebellion against the Pharaoh. Only this woman didn't hide herself. She hid what was good from evil. She didn't protect herself, she protected the promised rescuer. You see, she knew what God had promised to Eve in Genesis 3, that from your seed will come a deliverer, a rescuer. And there in that moment, Moses' mom saw that seed fulfilled. She saw that promise fulfilled, and she subverted the plan of the enemy by partnering with God to bring about rescue. Moses and his mom is Eve's redemption story. Why does that matter? Well, what if that means that God is rescuing you in ways that you don't see yet because it's so stinking subversive? It's so unexpected. It's so outside of your current plans, your current timeline, and so outside of how you want it to go down. What if that means that nothing in your past, or even in the past of your family origin, generation, or in the past of your church, or in the past of our community, or in the past of our nation, in the past is beyond God's ability to redeem and restore? What if that means that when God goes about rescuing you and redeeming your story, what if when God is doing that, he's actually redeeming more than your story? What if your rescue might be connected to and meant for someone else's rescue as well? We've been trained to look at God's rescue and God's salvation to us about us, me individually. But what if God is showing us right here in connecting Moses' rescue to Eve's redemption story that it is so much bigger than any single one of us? And what if God wants to take your story from shame and hiddenness like it was in the garden to selfless, risky, faith-fueled partnership with God's redemption plan that protects the promise and keeps the rescue plan in motion at all costs, even when it makes absolutely no sense? And what if, right now, the voices that are dominating your interior world, the voices of shame and your past and your brokenness and your mess-ups, the voices from other people and the voices from societal norms and pressures who are telling you that you're nothing, you're irredeemable, you're valueless, and that you're incapable, what if they are the what's powerless to a God who uses unexpected and imperfect and messy people to do the kingdom stuff? Listen. What we see in the narrative here is that God isn't just about rescuing and delivering Moses. He's not even just about rescuing and delivering Israel in the moment. He's about rescuing all of humanity and giving every story of shame and hiddenness and pride and ego and sin its redemption moment in Jesus. And what's crazy is that the same God who put that in motion is setting your life in motion. The same God writing the riff of a theme on Moses' story is behind the scene, just John Williams-ing the crap out of your story. He's doing that, guys. He's doing that. When Moses' mom put him in that basket, which is like an ark, She had no idea what was next. Right now, when you're facing the unthinkable, the unexplainable, the unimaginable, the hopeless, the irreparable, you're at the Moses putting the baby in the river moment, maybe, having no clue of what God, the rescuer, is doing unexpectedly, subversively, and thoroughly. Quit asking when and lean into how God does it. There's another scene in verse 3. I just alluded to it. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, and she coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. So she basically builds him an ark. And she places the child in the ark, in the basket, and places that on the Nile River. And I got ahead of myself on this way too. What does the Nile represent right now? Is that a river of life or a river of death? That is a river of death. Not metaphorically, literally. She puts Moses, humanize the moment. How desperate as a mom do you have to be to put your baby in a basket on a river? And she floats him in the very space that the enemy means for his death. How does God rescue? Unexpectedly, subversively, thoroughly. It'd been a lot easier for Moses' mom to go all like Navy SEAL, do a little nighttime hike, and go like, let's drop the baby off at the firefighters at the fire station and just hope they get rescued. Like, just drop the baby on Pharaoh's front door. I don't know why, but that's not how the story goes. For God to work his rescue through the mom, through Moses, they had to confront the thing meant for their demise. They had to interact with the thing that was the source of death and hurt and anger and generational things and greatest injustice and genocide. They had to literally wade themselves into the mess. Moses gets rescued through the thing meant to destroy him. I would prefer not to go through it, to go around it, above it, under it, beneath it, of all the other prepositions. How many of you would prefer that too? The thing you're facing. I don't want to go through it. I don't want to go on top of it. I don't want to interact with it. But that too is how God rescues. David said it this way in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the darkest valley. Other translations, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. No Pharaoh, no generational cycles, no addiction, no injustice, no nothing. I will fear no evil. Why? For you, the God that puts a baby on the top of a Nile and works a rescue plan of cosmic proportions are with me. You comfort me and you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil and my cup overflows. And surely your goodness and your love, they are not just with me, but they follow me. I love that language. They're not just with me, but they follow me. And they're with me all the days of my life. And I dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is how God rescues. Despite our preference, God rarely rescues us from, but through. Then in verse 5, Pharaoh's daughter goes down to the Nile to bathe. Stop. I have some questions. What is this river? Why are you bathing in it? Is that a fair question? Just question. Curious. Did Moses' mom study her bathing routine to know when she goes down to maybe put this basket? Or is this just, I don't know. Don't know. She trying to increase the odds? Again, pretend that you don't know the rest of the story. Because who finds Moses? Pharaoh's daughter. Now, the logical conclusion to that is that Pharaoh's daughter would then participate in Pharaoh's plan to kill the Hebrew baby. Only that's not what happens. And somehow she looks at this baby and she sees something that Moses' mom saw that is a drawback to Eve's redemption story. And she sees something about this baby that this is a Hebrew baby. And somehow she's miffed and she's taken back with some sort of compassion and some sort of mercy that is not only defying her father, but defying the empire and the future and every power struggle that is embedded in that. And she defies that out of fear for a God that she doesn't know as Yahweh, and saves this Hebrew baby. She opens the basket, and somehow she recognizes that this Hebrew baby needs one of its Hebrew midwives, a wet nurse. Hey, I have one of those. Let's send for her. Who does it turn out to be? Moses' biological mother. This is how God rescues. Unexpectedly, subversively, and thoroughly. When we don't see God at work, that's how he is doing it. The rescue plan inaugurated by Moses' mom was to get him away from Pharaoh, down a river to some sort of hope that was unforeseeable. God's plan brought him into the house of the enemy at the hands of his daughter, reconnected to his mom, and then handed back off to this enemy. An enemy that he would later confront and rescue a people group through his action, his relationship, his identity crisis, his wrestling match with shame that we'll see in the next 2 weeks when God appears to him in a burning bush and it's holy ground because God is healing Moses of his story so he can give him a greater purpose in life. That's how God rescues. And God doesn't just rescue us from things, he rescues us to things. How many of you know life is just straight up a struggle? It's a struggle no matter how you mix it up. We can struggle from stuff, and we do struggle from stuff. For Moses, he struggled through the stuff on the Nile. But why? Why? It's not purposeless. It's because he was struggling to something. Every act of your own story, as painful and difficult as it may be, may just be the exact fruitful grounds, the container, the soil that God is baking a deeper redemptive work for a greater purpose than you could imagine. How does that reframe your story this morning? How does that reframe your Nile River experience? How does that reframe your heritage and your past family stuff and your traumatic upbringings? If Moses is the archetype of the type of guy or person that God were to use, many of us are faking our way to something that God never just picked. He just never picked the perfect people. He never picked the perfectly devout and the perfectly behaved and the perfect views. He picks Moses, who was supposed to be dead, who kills someone, who runs for 40 years into the desert in shame and hiddenness, and just goes about life curious about who he is and why he is hidden for decades. And then God appears to him. I'm getting weeks ahead. Unexpectedly, subversively, and thoroughly heals him on holy ground and inaugurates him into the greatest purpose that he could ever imagine in his life. What is God doing in your story this morning that right now feels slow and painful and hopeless and purposeless? And it's causing you to say, why God? Why me? Why us? Why right now? What is God doing in your story that maybe what this can see to us today is that God rescue plans defies how we would do it. Defies our timelines, it defies our methods. And he is the God of the unexpected and the subversive and the thorough, that he takes raw materials and he turns them into something beautiful. It's how he shows his strength. You and I want deliverance from, but God tends to work through. God, think about it. God brought Moses to Pharaoh's front door. And the man who represents the enemy, the serpent from the garden, the genocidal, power-hungry maniac, raises his eventual conquering foe. Tell me that God doesn't know what he's doing. But how long? 80 long years. But how long? Don't know. But God's the God of rescue. How long? When will it end? No earthly idea. But God's the God of rescue. This is his pattern. This is who he is. This is what he does. And he connects our struggle from to a struggle through into a struggle towards something. And that is what Jesus called the kingdom of God. The life of an indwelling relationship with God the Father, Son, and Spirit on mission for the world, where God heals people and families and stories of their stuff by working through their story, and then he makes that their purpose. God is so loving, isn't he? So caring, so kind, so provocative. Just do it different, man. I don't like this way. His grace isn't cheap, and it's not short-sighted, and it takes time. And the journey from help to freedom, we talked about like sitting down in that AA chair for the first time into freedom, which is just a daily showing up to the process. It's long, and it's hard, and it takes as long as it takes. But God uses all kinds of people along the journey. And he sometimes even puts you in the last place you would want to be to work about his rescue in your life. So where should this land this morning? 2 invitations. If God takes 80 years in Moses' story, perhaps there's a deeper truth for us to recognize that God is not in a hurry even when we are. 80 long, expletive-filled, painful, suffering years. Darth Vader's march over and over and over again. The pursuing shark over and over and over and over again. As transcendent as a melody that John Williams can write is, how much more transcendent is the melody and the story that God is writing in your life through his divine rescue plan. So what do you do in the meantime? I want to draw you back to the midwives. What did they do? They obeyed God with hope. One of the subtexts of this narrative that we'll see for the next few weeks is like, dude, like, God, where are you? You're the God of our ancestors, but I don't feel you now. We've been in oppression for a while. They don't even know about the walkabout they're about to go on. Like, this has been long enough, right, God? We proved your point. We have built the thing for the bad guy, and he's killing us. Like, do you even care anymore? Don't you see the injustice we're crying out about? Well, one of the examples of how God is working here is through these women, through with hopeful obedience subverting the empire. Out of fear for God, they were just straight up rebellious for Jesus' sake, for God's sake. And I think there's an invitation to us for radical obedience to Jesus just in rebellion of the Pharaohs, and rebellion of the plan of the enemy, and rebellion to ways that may make us seem a little Teays Valley weird. I want to be Teays Valley weird a little bit. Not anti, not crazy, but I don't want to so easily blend in. Be a little weird, a little tricky, a little, what's going on with you, dog? This Nile River in your life should be sinking you, but it's not. Your family origin stuff should have like given you no hope and no future, but it's not. You're a little Teays Valley weird. Let's be Teays Valley weird. How? Radical obedience to Jesus. Second invitation is this. It hurts. It stinks. to trust in the slow work of God. How long, O Lord? 80 years. How long must I wait? How long must I suffer? How long? 80 years. Let's jump to the end of Moses' story. He died before the promise got fulfilled. What God began on the Nile River in the redemption story of Eve using women to subversively, thoroughly, and unexpectedly participate in God's redemption plan, he walked out through many, many decades of painful, disruptive, hard leadership and questions with faith and mountaintop moments and betrayals and all the things. And then he didn't even see the fruit. Or did he? What if he saw the greater fruit, but he didn't see the outcome? What if the when question is just looking for the right outcome when the how question is saying, what's the deeper work? Where's the fruit in the here and the now? What if what started in you as parents will never come to fruition until after you're gone through your kids' lives, and that makes it worth it? What if you can trust God, slow work that will outlive you? And instead of saying when and how long, it's just, I'm yours, God. They're yours. I will radically obey in the meantime, and I will trust your slow work because it's your track record. Above all, a poem written by an Italian Catholic 400 years ago says this: above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are so impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet it is the law of progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. You know what the most Hayes Valley weird, rebellious, defiant thing you could do today might just be? Is to trust the slow, unhurried speed of a loving God who is never moving too fast and never moving too slow. And if we can become people who learn to live present to his reality, we will find ourselves marching to the beat of the conductor of time and space and human story. When life feels out of step, it's not because God's out of step. It's because we're not living aware to his timeline. And sometimes, most of the time, we never do. We just trust the slow work of God. So how does God rescue? Unexpectedly, subversively, and thoroughly. Would you stand this morning? I invite you just to close your eyes for a moment and linger just a couple minutes longer. And Ben, even before you play for a second, could you listen for the melody of God for a moment? I know that sounds really abstract. Maybe in an unhurried, silent, slow way this morning, we could listen for the melody that God is writing. It may be a word, maybe a sound, maybe an image, a drawback to something you read. It could be a verse in Scripture, a journal entry from years ago. What is the unhurried, slow-working God speaking to you through his Spirit? Another invitation. if you were to draw your mind to the thing that feels like the Nile River in your life, I imagine you could think of some things. And so into that exact space, what's the invitation? Are you Moses' mom in a moment where you've just got to release something that you've been protecting? Release someone into God's plan beyond your control to surrender? Are you the person that needs to walk through the valley of the shadow of death knowing God is with you? Get your head out of the sand. What's your Nile River this morning? And the God who rescues, the God who loves, the God who saves and redeems and rewrites every story, the God that is continually doing Exodus. Holy Spirit, we just invite you into this moment to do Exodus work in the hearts and the minds of the people present in this room and those catching this online and those that may grab this weeks, months, years later. Would you help us to reimagine our questions from a timeline to the person who's writing the timeline, asking for the greater work? And so, Jesus, as we sing and we respond, and we do that with our bodies, and we do that with our words and the melodies and the lyrics and the sound that comes out of each person, would you somehow take the broken bits and the competing thoughts and the distracted nature and the voices that haven't shut up for years in our worlds and just bring them to calm? And may we hear your words, your melody, your variation, your personal variation of a theme of rescue and God's pursuing love. You are our God, and we are your people.